The universe, as it turns out, operates on a fairly predictable hierarchy. At the bottom you have your standard carbon-based life forms stumbling around, trying to figure out fire and basic mathematics. In the middle, civilizations that have mastered interstellar travel but still think diplomacy involves who has the bigger laser cannon. And at the very top, oh what a surprise, sits the Vorthak Empire, congratulating themselves on being the galaxy's designated apex predator for the past 3 millennia. Now, the Vorthak didn't earn this title through particularly clever strategy or innovative technology. No, they achieved galactic dominance the old-fashioned way, by being unreasonably good at violence and having the social grace of a neutron star collision. Their standard operating procedure was delightfully simple: show up at a planet, flex their chitinous exoskeletons menacingly, and announce that the locals had 2 choices: immediate surrender or immediate annihilation. Surprisingly effective, really. The Vorthak military doctrine was built around a few core principles that had served them well across 847 conquered species. First, overwhelming force applied with theatrical flair. Second, never negotiate when you can simply demand. Third, if something bleeds, you can kill it, and if it doesn't bleed, you can probably still kill it with sufficient effort. It was a philosophy that had worked spectacularly well for roughly 3,000 years, which in galactic terms made them practically ancient and definitely cranky. Their latest target was a backwater solar system in what the galactic maps generously labeled as sector nobody cares about. The third planet from its unremarkable yellow star showed all the classic signs of a civilization ripe for conquest: radio transmissions, primitive satellites, and what appeared to be an alarming number of explosions happening on the surface for recreational purposes. The Vorthak High Command classified it as a routine acquisition. Estimated completion time: 6 standard galactic hours, including time for the traditional post-conquest victory feast. The Vorthak arrived at Earth with all the subtlety of a supernova, their massive dreadnoughts blotting out the sun over major population centers. Admiral Keshvar, resplendent in his ceremonial armor that had been polished with the tears of conquered enemies, or at least, that's what the armor Polish bottle claimed, prepared to deliver the standard ultimatum that had worked so beautifully on the previous 847 worlds. What happened next was unexpected. Instead of the usual screaming, panicking, or desperate attempts at negotiation, the humans responded to their dramatic entrance with what could only be described as bureaucratic efficiency. Within 30 minutes of the Vorthak fleet's arrival, Earth's governments had issued a joint statement requesting that all visiting alien vessels please fill out Form 27B for temporary atmospheric entry permits, provide current registration and insurance documentation, and submit to a brief customs inspection for prohibited biological materials. Admiral Keshvar, who had been expecting terrified pleas for mercy, instead found himself in a 3-hour conference call with someone from the United Nations who kept asking about parking permits and whether the Vorthak fleet's fusion drives were in compliance with local emission standards. The humans seemed genuinely concerned about the environmental impact of their weapons systems and suggested they might want to consider switching to renewable energy sources for their next invasion. When the Admiral finally managed to interrupt with threats of planetary annihilation, the human, who introduced himself as Dave from the Department of Extraterrestrial Affairs, apparently a government division that had somehow existed since 1952, politely asked if the Vorthak had considered filing their grievances through proper diplomatic channels first. Dave also mentioned that Earth had a strict no-soliciting policy and could they please remove their ships from restricted airspace before someone called the authorities. The authorities, it turned out, were already on their way. What the Vorthak had mistaken for a primitive military response was actually air traffic control, asking them to please identify themselves and explain why they hadn't filed a flight plan. Apparently, hovering massive warships over major cities was a violation of several international treaties and at least 47 local noise ordinances. Keshvar, feeling his authority slipping away faster than a Zephyrian eel in a containment breach, decided to fall back on the tried-and-true Vorthak tradition of trial by combat. If these humans wanted to do things the complicated way, fine. They would settle this in the arena of absolute dominance, where the Vorthak had never, not once in 3,000 years, lost a single combat. The humans, much to everyone's surprise, accepted immediately. In fact, they seemed almost excited about it, which should have been the first warning sign. Within hours, they had not only agreed to the combat trial, but had also submitted a detailed list of safety requirements, liability waivers, and insurance forms that needed to be completed before the event could proceed. They asked if the arena met current galactic safety standards and whether there would be adequate medical facilities on standby. The arena of absolute dominance was, as its name suggested, designed to be absolutely dominating. Carved from a single asteroid and enhanced with the finest Vorthak technology, it was a perfect sphere of reinforced ultra-steel, honeycombed with force field generators, gravity manipulators, and automated defense systems. The arena floor could shift between different environments at will: scorching desert, freezing tundra, corrosive swamps, or the personal favorite, a maze of razor-sharp obsidian spikes. No challenger had ever escaped the arena alive. The Vorthak kept detailed records of every combat, mostly for training purposes, but also because they enjoyed re-watching particularly entertaining deaths during their equivalent of movie night. The arena's automated systems were programmed to adapt to any strategy, counter any weapon, and eliminate any threat with ruthless efficiency. As news of the upcoming combat spread through the galactic communication networks, species from across known space began placing bets on the outcome. The odds were, predictably, heavily skewed in favor of the Vorthak. Most bookmakers weren't even taking bets on human victory. They were only accepting wagers on how quickly the humans would be eliminated and in how many pieces. The Zalithian betting pools offered odds of 10,000 to 1 against human survival past the first 60 seconds. The Crystalline Consortium, known for their mathematical precision, calculated a 0.0003% chance of human victory, and that was only accounting for the possibility of a catastrophic arena malfunction. Even the eternally optimistic flower people of Serenity Prime, who believed in the inherent goodness of all sentient beings, quietly put their money on the Vorthak. The human representative arrived at the arena in what could generously be described as the least impressive entrance in the arena's history. While the Vorthak champion Zekthal made his traditional appearance, 12 feet of gleaming chitin, acid-dripping claws and regenerating limbs, accompanied by dramatic lighting and a choir of conquest songs. The human simply walked in through the maintenance entrance, wearing coveralls and carrying what appeared to be a toolbox. His name was Jenkins, and he worked in facility maintenance for something called the Department of Practical Solutions. He spent the first 10 minutes of his arena time not preparing for combat, but instead walking around the perimeter with a clipboard, occasionally tapping the walls and making notes. At one point he pulled out what looked like a small device and began scanning various sections of the arena structure, muttering things like "that's not up to code" and "who designed this death trap." Zechthel, meanwhile, was going through his pre-combat ritual, which involved a lot of roaring, claw sharpening, and intimidating poses designed to strike terror into the hearts of his opponents. The psychological warfare aspect of Vorthak combat doctrine emphasized the importance of breaking an enemy's spirit before the actual fighting began. It had worked beautifully against 847 previous species. Jenkins appeared to be ignoring him completely. When the combat officially began, Zechthel charged forward with a battle cry that had been known to shatter crystalline beings and cause small mammals to spontaneously lose consciousness. His acidic claws, capable of slicing through reinforced battle armor, swept toward the human with lethal precision. Jenkins stepped slightly to the left and pressed something on the wall. The arena's gravity generators, which had been humming along normally for the past several centuries, suddenly developed what could charitably be called a significant malfunction. Zechthel, who had been charging forward with great momentum, found himself abruptly weightless and spinning uncontrollably toward the ceiling. His roar of fury doppled into something that sounded more like a very large, very angry balloon losing air. While the Vorthak champion flailed helplessly in zero gravity, Jenkins calmly walked over to another section of the arena and began working on what appeared to be a control panel that definitely wasn't supposed to be accessible to combatants. The arena's automated defense systems, designed to prevent exactly this sort of tampering, somehow failed to activate. In fact, they seemed to be experiencing their own technical difficulties. The force field generators that created the arena's impenetrable barriers began flickering ominously. The environmental controls, which were supposed to create deadly hazards for the combatants, instead began producing what could only be described as a light, refreshing breeze with a hint of lavender. Even the arena's legendary obsidian spike maze retracted into the floor after making some concerning grinding noises. Jenkins, apparently satisfied with whatever he had done to the control systems, pulled out a small communication device and spoke into it. "Yeah, it's Jenkins. The whole system's held together with wishful thinking and some really questionable engineering decisions. We're going to need a full safety inspection and probably a complete rebuild. Also, somebody should talk to whoever designed this thing about basic structural integrity." By this time, Zechthel had managed to grab onto one of the arena's support struts and was attempting to pull himself back toward the combat area. His acidic blood, which was supposed to be one of his most fearsome weapons, was instead floating around the arena in perfectly spherical droplets, creating what honestly looked more like a rather artistic light show than a deadly hazard. The galactic audience, who had tuned in expecting to watch a brief and brutal execution, found themselves witnessing something unprecedented, a Vorthak champion being systematically defeated by what appeared to be a routine maintenance inspection. The betting pools crashed as bookmakers tried to figure out how to calculate odds for a scenario that had never occurred in recorded galactic history. Jenkins, seemingly oblivious to the mounting chaos around him, continued his methodical examination of the arena's systems. At one point he discovered that the arena's central power core was operating at 110% of its rated capacity, which explained the occasional sparking and the ominous humming noise that everyone had assumed was just part of the dramatic atmosphere. "This is a serious safety violation," Jenkins announced to no one in particular. "One power fluctuation and this whole place could experience catastrophic decompression. Who signed off on this design?" The answer, as it happened, was the Vorthak High Command, who had prioritized intimidation factor over basic engineering principles. The arena of absolute dominance was indeed absolutely dominating, but primarily in terms of the number of safety regulations it violated and the creative ways it could potentially explode. As if responding to Jenkins' professional critique, the arena began demonstrating exactly why proper maintenance schedules existed. The artificial gravity flickered between normal, 0, and what felt like about 3 times standard galactic gravity. The atmospheric processes started producing a thin fog that smelled suspiciously like ozone and burned circuits. And somewhere in the arena's mechanical depths, something important sounding began making the kind of noise that usually preceded expensive insurance claims. Zektul, still struggling with the gravitational anomalies, managed to roar out a challenge that roughly translated to "Face me in honorable combat, tiny maintenance worker." Jenkins looked up from his inspection checklist and considered this request with the same professional detachment he might apply to a broken air conditioning unit. "Well, I suppose I could, but honestly, I think your arena's going to do most of the work for me. You might want to evacuate to a safe distance." As if on cue, the arena's primary structural supports began developing stress fractures. The Vorthak had built their arena of absolute dominance to be indestructible in combat, but they had apparently never considered what would happen if someone actually tried to perform routine maintenance on a structure that had been operating beyond safe parameters for several centuries. The truth began to dawn on the watching galaxy. The humans hadn't stumbled into this situation through luck or accident. Every seemingly bumbling response, every bureaucratic delay, every safety inspection and environmental impact study, all of it had been calculated. While the Vorthak had been posturing and threatening, the humans had been studying, learning, and quietly identifying every weakness in systems that their enemies considered perfect. Jenkins wasn't just a maintenance worker, he was a reconnaissance specialist whose job was to understand how things worked, and more importantly, how they could be made to stop working. The Department of Practical Solutions wasn't a government bureaucracy, it was humanity's answer to the galaxy's apex predators. They had turned problem-solving into a weapon, and their weapon of choice was competence. As the arena of absolute dominance experienced what the subsequent investigation would classify as total systematic failure due to deferred maintenance and questionable design choices, Jenkins calmly walked toward the emergency exit. Zektul, finally freed from the gravitational anomalies, but now dealing with structural collapse, followed as quickly as his 12 feet of apex predator biology could manage. The galaxy's bookmakers frantically tried to calculate payouts for an outcome that had never appeared in their actuarial tables: human victory by safety inspection. The Vorthak High Command found themselves in the unprecedented position of having to explain to their entire empire how their greatest warrior had been defeated by someone with a clipboard and a basic understanding of structural engineering. In the aftermath, as emergency repair crews worked to stabilize what remained of the arena, the full scope of humanity's strategy became clear. They hadn't just been stalling with bureaucratic procedures, they had been conducting reconnaissance, gathering intelligence, and developing countermeasures. Every form filled out, every safety inquiry made, every environmental concern raised had been part of a comprehensive analysis of Vorthak technology and procedures. The Department of Practical Solutions, it turned out, had been studying the Vorthak for decades through intercepted communications and careful observation of their conquest patterns. They had identified the fundamental flaw in Vorthak thinking, the assumption that superior technology automatically meant superior implementation. The Vorthak built impressive weapons and intimidating structures, but they had grown complacent about maintenance, safety protocols, and the boring but essential details that kept complex systems functioning. Dave from the Department of Extraterrestrial Affairs had used those 3 hours of conference calls to map the Vorthak command structure, identify their communication protocols, and probe for weaknesses in their operational procedures. The endless questions about permits and regulations hadn't been bureaucratic incompetence, they had been intelligence gathering disguised as administrative thoroughness. The humans had weaponized the one thing that most advanced civilizations took for granted: basic competence. They understood that the most sophisticated technology in the universe was only as reliable as the people maintaining it, and they had correctly identified that the Vorthak's greatest weakness was their own success. 3,000 years of easy victories had made them sloppy. The galactic community watched in fascination as the implications became clear. The Vorthak Empire, faced with the choice between admitting their technological superiority, was built on foundations of neglected maintenance and poor quality control, or accepting human assistance in bringing their systems up to proper safety standards, chose what they considered the lesser of two humiliations. The resulting Galactic Safety Initiative saw human technical advisors dispatched throughout Vorthak space, ostensibly to help upgrade their systems to meet basic safety requirements. In reality, it was the most thorough intelligence-gathering operation in galactic history, conducted under the cover of routine maintenance and safety inspections. Other species began requesting similar technical assistance from the humans, partly out of genuine concern for their own system integrity, but mostly because they had witnessed what happened when you ignored basic maintenance for too long. The humans were happy to oblige, establishing the Interstellar Bureau of Standards and Practices to help ensure that all galactic civilizations maintained their technology according to proper safety protocols. The Vorthak found themselves in the peculiar position of having to thank the humans for pointing out the structural deficiencies that could have led to catastrophic failures across their empire. Their arena of absolute dominance was completely rebuilt according to human safety specifications, which somehow made it even more intimidating, while also ensuring it wouldn't spontaneously collapse during important events. Zekthul, once he recovered from the experience, became something of a celebrity as the only Vorthak champion to survive a combat in the arena, even if the victory conditions had been somewhat unconventional. He eventually wrote a best-selling memoir titled How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love Maintenance Schedules. Jenkins returned to Earth with a commendation for outstanding achievement in applied problem-solving and a promotion to senior technical analyst. He spent the rest of his career traveling throughout known space, conducting safety inspections that somehow always resulted in dramatic improvements to galactic security and an inexplicable increase in human influence throughout the region. The arena combat became required viewing in human military academies, not as an example of combat tactics, but as a masterclass in the strategic application of competence. The lesson was simple: sometimes the most effective weapon isn't the biggest gun or the most advanced technology, it's knowing how things actually work and having the patience to do the job correctly. The betting pools eventually paid out on human victory by technical superiority, though the definition of technical superiority had to be expanded to include superior understanding of proper maintenance procedures. The flower people of Serenity Prime were particularly pleased, as their small wager on human victory through harmony with universal principles of structural integrity paid out at astronomical odds. And so humanity joined the galactic community not as conquerors or victims, but as the species that turned customer service into statecraft and made quality control into a form of warfare. They had found the galaxy's apex predator waiting in an arena designed for absolute dominance, and discovered that the real apex predator had been there all along, hiding in the maintenance manual. The universe still operates on its predictable hierarchy, but these days everyone makes sure to read the fine print and keep up with their safety inspections. Because the most dangerous enemy isn't the one with the biggest weapons, it's the one who actually knows how to use them properly, and more importantly knows how to stop you from using yours. In the end, the Vorthak learned a valuable lesson about the importance of basic competence, proper maintenance, and never underestimating a species that treats paperwork as a legitimate form of warfare. And somewhere in the galaxy, Jenkins is probably conducting another routine inspection, clipboard in hand, quietly ensuring that the universe operates according to proper safety standards. After all, someone has to keep the lights on.